Ever heard that old James Brown song? It's a man's world. It's a classic, no doubt. But it really gets you thinking, like, does that still hold true today? Especially when it comes to the music industry.
Yeah, it's a question that's been on a lot of people's minds lately, right?
Totally. We've all seen the headlines about more and more women making waves in music. But we wanted to go deeper than just, like, anecdotal evidence. We wanted to get into the hard data.
Right, because those feel-good stories don't always paint the full picture.
Exactly. So for this deep dive, we're looking at two main sources. First up, we have this really thought-provoking piece by Dr. Jareau Almeyda.
Now, for anyone who isn't familiar with him, he's got quite the background.
Right. He's got a PhD. He's a 9/11 survivor.
And he's got this deep passion for music.
I mean, you can tell he loves digging into those hidden realities. Yeah.
Totally. And in his latest article, he really digs into this idea of women in music and, like, how far we've come.
And he uses a pretty interesting example to kick things off, too. The Grammy Awards.
Ah, the Grammys. Arguably the biggest night in music.
Exactly. So he starts with that classic James Brown line, "It's a man's world," and then he's like, is that still true when you look at something like the Grammys?
And the way he breaks down the 2024 nominations is pretty interesting.
It is. He points out that 7 out of the 8 artists nominated for those major categories, Record of the Year, Album of the Year, Song of the Year, they're all women.
Which is huge, right?
Yeah.
And to be clear, the Grammys, they aren't just about popularity.
Oh, absolutely not.
These awards are judged by a whole panel of music professionals, people with serious experience representing all these different genres and backgrounds. So these nominations, they carry a lot of weight.
It's true. It's not just about who's got the most streams or radio play. This is about recognition from within the industry itself.
Exactly. Now, Dr. Almeyda definitely sees this as a sign of progress.
Rightfully so. I mean, it's hard to deny the significance of seeing so many talented women being recognized on such a huge stage.
It really is. And he even goes on to encourage his readers to do the same in their own fields. Like, highlight those amazing women who are making a difference, whether they're Grammy winners or not.
Love that.
Yeah.
But before we get ahead of ourselves, we wanted to see what the data says.
Right. Because those Grammy nominations, as exciting as they are, they're just a snapshot.
Moment in time.
Exactly. So to get the bigger picture, we need to look at the long game. And that's where the 2024 Annenberg Inclusion Initiative report comes in.
Now, this report is seriously impressive.
Oh, yeah. They analyzed 12 years of data, looking at over 1,200 popular songs.
12 years? That's wild.
Right. They tracked how women are represented, like across the board, songwriting, performing, producing, you name it.
So no stone unturned, basically.
Exactly. So are you ready to see what they found?
Hit me with it.
So diving into the Annenberg report, one of the first things that jumped out was their look at female representation on the Billboard charts.
Oh, yeah. I was really interested to see what they found there.
Well, it's interesting because it seems like at first glance, it supports what Dr. Almeyda was saying. Like, yeah, female artists overall hit that record-breaking 35% in 2023.
Right, exactly. Like, finally.
Right. But then, when you dig a little deeper, the report actually shows that this surge was largely attributed to solo female artists.
Oh, wow. Okay, so it's not quite the full picture at first glance.
Exactly.
So, like, are we talking about artists like Woo, Lizzo, Adele?
Yeah, them, Beyonce, absolutely. It seems like these artists have figured out how to navigate the industry on their own terms, And their success is undeniable.
Oh, totally. But you're saying that women in bands or duos aren't seeing the same level of breakthrough.
Yeah, that's right. Now, the report doesn't get into, like, the specific reasons behind this, but seeing that pattern, it kind of makes you think.
Yeah, like, what is it about being part of a group as opposed to going solo that makes it tougher for women to get that same level of recognition?
Right. Is it about decision-making power within the band? Visibility? There's a lot to unpack there.
Totally. And I feel like that actually ties into another big point in the report, what you were saying before about genre.
Oh, for sure. Genre plays a huge role in all of this. For example, the report found that pop music tends to have better representation of women, which makes sense if you think about it.
Yeah, when you look at the pop charts, it tracks.
Right. But when you look at genres like alternative, hip-hop, even country, the story changes completely.
Yeah. I mean, you look at those charts, and it's still, unfortunately, very male-dominated.
And that's where the report's data gets really interesting, because it allows us to start asking those tougher questions, like, why do these disparities exist between genres?
Is it about access? historical context. I mean, it's not like women just aren't interested in making those kinds of music, right?
Exactly. It's about digging deeper into the systems and biases that might be more present in certain spaces than others.
Totally. Okay, so we've talked about artists, but what about the songwriters behind the music? Because the report dives into that too, right?
It does, and thankfully there's some good news on that front. For the first time in the 12 years they analyzed, the report shows that female songwriters had a pretty huge jump in representation.
Oh, wow. That's great. What was the increase?
Well, in 2022 it was at 14.1%, but by 2023 that number had jumped to 19.5%. So behind the scenes, at least, it seems like things are starting to shift in a positive direction.
That's awesome to hear. So more women getting recognized for their creative contributions, even if they aren't necessarily the ones in the spotlight.
Yes. And it's not just songwriting. The report also found that female producers, although still drastically underrepresented, hit their highest point in the analyzed period, too.
Oh, wow. What was the percentage for that?
So in 2022, they were at 3.5%, but by 2023, that number climbed to 6.5%.
Okay, so still incredibly low, but hey, an upward trend is an upward trend.
It is. It's a sign that change is possible, even in those areas of the industry that have traditionally been the toughest to crack.
Absolutely. But I think we also have to address the elephant in the room here, right? I mean, when we talk about those really low numbers, the area where things are still the most unequal has to be music production.
100%. It's definitely something both the report and Dr. Almeyda address.
And I feel like that statistic Dr. Almeyda called out really says it all.
The one about the ratio of male to female producers?
Yes. I mean, talk about a stark reality check.
It is, and honestly, it's a number that's worth repeating because I think it really highlights the scope of the problem.
Let's take a quick break. Want to equip your child with the skills of top global consultants? Don't let them fall behind. Raising Tomorrow's Leaders, The Consultant's Mindset by Dr. Jareau Almeyda is your guide to fostering essential skills in your children for their lifelong success. Available now on Amazon. Okay, welcome back.
Okay, so for anyone who maybe forgot, remind us what that ratio is.
The ratio of male to female music producers, 30 to 1.
30 to 1, wow. It's just crazy to hear it said out loud like that, you know?
It is, and it underscores just how much work still needs to be done.
Yeah.
And I think to really grasp what that number means, we need to remember what a producer actually does.
Yeah, because it's easy to just see the title and not really understand what goes into it.
Right. It's not just like hanging out in the studio. These are the people involved in every single aspect of creating a record. Song selection, arrangement, coaching artists, making those crucial decisions about the sound and direction of the music, you name it.
They really shape the sound we hear, don't they?
Exactly. And that's why this disparity is so important. When that role is so heavily dominated by one demographic, it shapes the music that gets made and heard.
Right, and ultimately what gets celebrated by the industry as a whole. It's not just about numbers. It's about who gets to have a voice and whose perspective gets heard.
Exactly. And I think the report digs even deeper into that idea of representation when it looks at the breakdown of producers by race.
Yeah, and I imagine that's where things get even more disheartening.
Unfortunately, yeah. The report found that only 0.96% of music producers are women of color.
Less than 1%. That's really hard to hear.
It is. It points to a much bigger issue. It's not just about gender. It's about intersectionality, the ways in which gender and race overlap to create even greater barriers.
Absolutely. It's systemic for sure.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, with such a complex problem, does the Annenberg report offer any potential solutions? Or just kind of leave us with that bleak outlook?
It does, actually. And this is what I appreciate about this report. It doesn't just point out the problems. It actually offers some really interesting potential solutions.
Okay, so they don't just leave us hanging.
Exactly. And one of their big takeaways, which really resonated with me, is this idea of treating every song as an opportunity.
One song, one opportunity. I like the sound of that, but what does that actually mean?
So it's about shifting the way we think. Like, instead of looking at the industry as this really limited space, where there are only so many spots for women at the table.
Right, like it's a zero-sum game.
Exactly. This idea is about approaching each new song that gets created as a chance to challenge those old patterns.
So less about forcing outcomes and more about being intentional with the choices we make at every step.
100%. Like, when you're bringing people on to work on a song, who's writing it? Who's producing? Who's engineering that session? If we're thoughtful about those decisions, it can make a real difference.
Instead of just defaulting to the same old networks and hierarchies, we can actively create space for those voices that haven't always been heard.
Exactly. And it's not just about individual songs either. The report talks about the importance of supporting those organizations that are already doing the work, groups that are specifically focused on empowering women in music.
Totally. And there are some great ones out there.
Yeah, like She Is the Music, Spotify Equal, Women's Audio Mission. I mean, there are tons of others. But these organizations, they're providing those essential resources, the mentorship, the networking opportunities that are so crucial, especially early on in a music career.
It's good to know those resources exist.
Yeah.
It's easy to hear these statistics, see those low percentages, and just feel totally overwhelmed.
Right. Like, what can we even do? But it's important to remember that change is possible, and it's already happening.
Absolutely. Awareness is huge, which is why we wanted to have this conversation today. But you're right. Awareness without action, it doesn't really mean much.
Exactly. And it's not like any one person has to do it all, but we all have a part to play, whether it's supporting female artists, getting involved with these organizations, even just having conversations like these with our friends and colleagues.
Well said. So as we wrap up here, I think it's safe to say this deep dive has been eye-opening, to say the least.
To say the least, yeah.
I mean, we knew coming into this that women in music, it's not a new topic, right? But to see the actual data, those numbers laid out so clearly.
Yeah, it really paints a picture.
It does. And I think it's a picture with a lot of different layers, like, yeah, we've seen some amazing progress. Female artists, they're top in the charts. Songwriters finally getting more of the recognition they deserve. Even with producing, there's a tiny glimmer of hope there. But then there's the flip side.
The reality is that there's still so much work to be done, especially when you look at music production and specifically women of color.
Yeah. Less than 1%. That number, it's going to stick with me for a while.
Me too. And I think that's where it's important to remember that these aren't just numbers we're talking about. They represent real people, talented individuals who deserve the chance to share their music with the world.
100%.
Yeah.
So next time you hear a song you love, take a second to see who's behind it. Look at those liner notes. Google those producers and engineers, especially the ones you've never heard of. Who knows, you might just discover your next favorite artist or get totally inspired by their story. And hey, if you found this deep dive interesting, share it with a friend. Let's keep this conversation going.